The Stories of the Second World War 50p has just been individually issued, and what better place to explore some stories of World War II than the Royal Signals Museum in Dorset. So come along as we explore some genuine World War II artefacts and hear from the experts.
Hello, my name's Adam Forty from the Royal Signals Museum. I'm the Business Development Manager and Deputy Director. And we're standing in front of a case which is dedicated to Thomas Waters, Corporal Thomas Waters, who was one of the Royal Signals core heroes. Tommy Waters went across at D-Day attached with the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry, and their job was to create a communication line across Caen Canal Bridge to the Paras who'd landed on the other side of the river. He took off from Tarrant Rushton in gliders. They landed within 40 metres of the actual bridge, and their job was to lay line across the bridge. So a two-man line party took a cable laying device, a handheld cable laying device, to lay the cable. Within their range was a maternity hospital which the Germans had occupied, who had both machine guns and mortars. So as soon as they arrived on the bridge and started to cross it, they came under heavy German fire from the machine guns and mortars, and both were injured. Corporal Waters, seeing this, ran across the bridge, picked up the first injured man, took him back to safety, ensuring that he was okay, ran back across the bridge, picked up the second man, and again ran back to the British position to safety and security. And then on a third occasion, he ran back across the bridge, picked up the cable laying device, and ran across the bridge and delivered the cable to the Paras, therefore completing this communications line between the Paras and brigade headquarters. For that, he was awarded the military medal. And actually, after he had done all this work, he had to keep the line intact, and therefore during the day he would be running up and down the bridge under heavy fire on all occasions, repairing the line should it get damaged by the German mortars. So some years ago there was a release of a new film called The Railway Man, based on the life of Eric Lomax. It starred Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth, and was the story of a Royal Signals lieutenant called Eric Lomax, who was a bit of a railway buff, who would go around drawing and recording all the engines that he saw in his youth. He ended up in the Royal Signals in Singapore in 1942 with the fall of Singapore, and was captured by the Japanese. He was then jailed, interred in a POW camp, which was Kachambori, although he also spent time at Changi, but mainly Kachambori, and he was put to work on the Death Railway, so the Burma Railway. During his time there, he and some other friends with radio experience managed to steal bits and pieces from the Japanese and get some other pieces from sort of local workforce and create a receiving radio. So it wasn't a transmitter, it was just a receiver to which they'd listen, and really to boost morale within the camp. Unfortunately, the Japanese got to learn that this existed. They made a search for it and not only found the radio, but found that Eric Lomax, because of his nature, had been drawing a map of the railway. This wasn't for any spying reason, it was purely out of his own interest. But obviously the Japanese interpret this to be spying. So him and the people that the Japanese guards thought were responsible were taken aside and brutally tortured for the next few months. Under all sorts of thugs, but the main person who was running the interrogation was the interpreter, Tagasi Nagasi. Eventually, having gone through all sorts of horrific nightmare situations, both in Changi, eventually he got sent to Outram jail, which was even worse, and broke his own legs in order to survive that. and got taken back to Changi POW hospital and survived the war. But he did suffer dreadfully from PTSD and divorced from his first wife, and then met his second wife, Patty, who you can see in the picture over here. They remarried, but again, he would wake up at night screaming and had all sorts of problems. So Patty tried to get Eric to confront his issues and do something about it. When they were doing that, they realized that Tagasi Nagasi had also survived the war, and we think that at that time Eric hatched a plot to go across and kill him. But they started a dialogue. Patty it was who set the wheels in motion, but eventually Nagasi and Lomax started writing to each other and eventually planned to meet on the bridge over the River Kwai. In the film, it's the ending is very dramatic, and Firth as Lomax starts banging tables and putting him in cells and all sorts of things, and shouting at him for what he had done. But the reality was somewhat different. We were invited to the launch in London through Lying Escape Films, so we all went up the red carpet and saw them. And afterwards I spoke to both Colin Firth and Patty Lomax, who was there. And when I was speaking to Patty, I asked her how she felt about the film, and she said, yeah, it was very good. Eric wouldn't have been able to see it, obviously. Sadly, he'd just passed away. But she said it wasn't quite as good as the first one, which obviously piqued my interest. So I discovered that actually Eric Lomax took a documentary film crew when he went to see Tagasi Nagasi on the bridge over the River Kwai and filmed the whole thing with Patty and Eric in their role, doing their thing. So I tracked down the director-producer, who is a guy called Mike Finlayson, who again is sadly not with us anymore, and he sent us the reel, and we now have the rights to reproduce that film and do so. But it's a fascinating counter image to what you see on the Hollywood movie to the reality, which is actually when Nagasi and Lomax meet, they sit down next to each other. It's a bit like a typical British tea party. Very quiet, very mild-mannered, no shouting, no drama. And Nagasi asked Lomax if he could touch his arm, and Lomax said yes, of course. And he said, this is the one we broke when we beat you, isn't it? And that was the most dramatic part of it. It was just sitting down like an English cup of tea, English gentleman chatting. And actually, it did help Lomax come to terms with his PTSD, and Lomax and Nagasi eventually became friends. And I think the end of the film and the end of the book says, at some stage, the hating has to stop. What you're looking at the moment are our collection of SOE and clandestine radios. The story I like to use to illustrate that is that of Noor Inayat Khan, who came from a Sufi family who were pacifists, born in Moscow, moved to Britain, then moved to France, and then at the fall of France she came back to the UK. She and her brother, despite the fact that they were pacifists, decided they should be doing something against the growing Nazism in Europe. So they both joined up. Noor Inayat Khan started off as a radio operator with the WAAF, and eventually was headhunted by the Special Operations Executive. She would be what they call a pianist, which is a radio operator, and radio operators with the SOE basically had a 6-week lifespan in operations and a 50% chance of getting back alive. She did very well with her radio operators course within the SOE, because obviously she had experience that many of them didn't have. When she was moved to Bewley to do some of the security and fight training where they taught arms and things like that, she didn't do quite so well. She was supposed to be quite scared, and they weren't sure whether or not they should send her to France, but eventually they did so. And unfortunately, in one of the early operations in 1943, she was given away by a colleague who was paid money to give names of SOE agents, one of which was Noor Inayat Khan's, and unfortunately she was then caught and captured. Eventually she tried to escape twice, She escaped successfully on a third occasion, and because of that was thought of as a high-risk individual and put in solitary confinement. Just taking back a step, what you can see in the suitcase radios that they would have used, they actually are 32 pounds in weight, so roughly 32 bags of sugar in a suitcase, so you can imagine the kind of weight that you're talking about. And once you had to send a message, this didn't have a power supply, so the first thing you'd have to do is find a power supply, then you would encode your message and then obviously transmit it in Morse. If you started transmitting and you took longer than 20 minutes, the chances you would be direction found by the Germans, who had a very sophisticated DF unit patrolling around the streets, particularly of Paris, and they could pick you up within minutes and DF your position. So you had to be very quick. Obviously, she did eventually get captured, and unfortunately, because she was high risk, she was moved to Dachau, and the next morning, she and 3 other SOE agents were taken out and executed by firing squad. So another very sad story of somebody who gave their life for their country.
So the Stories of the Second World War 50p obviously features some of the medals that we have here, and I just want to ask your opinion on the coin. What do you think of it?
Well, I have 2 strong feelings about it. First of all, it's an incredibly worthy thing to do, and it's a very attractive coin as well. But the interesting thing that we find in museums is that immediately after the Second World War, every family in the United Kingdom would have had a family member, either close or slightly apart, who was involved with the British military. And there was a great understanding of what the military was and did. Years later, in 2025, most people don't have that connection anymore.
Yeah.
And they don't, a lot of people don't really understand the military, what it does, how it functions, what it's there for. So something like this is a great jog to people's memory to remember the people who gave their lives, the people who won these medals doing incredible things. So I think it's, from our perspective, it's a hugely important and significant thing to really begin looking at some of these stories again and bringing them back into the public eye.
Yeah, it's so important that they continue to be told and that this history can live on.
Yes, absolutely. And we did be delighted to have one as well on display.
Aww. It's so important for these stories to continue to be shared as such a key part of our history, and it's places like this that keep the past alive. A huge thank you to the Royal Signals Museum for showing us some incredible stories from the Second World War. And don't forget, you can secure the Stories of the Second World War 50p for your collection now by clicking the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.